Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I'm doing my February wrap up. So in February I completed 7 books and I had 1 DNF, which was Ghostwood Song by Erica Waters. I already posted my winter DNFs video, so that will be linked below if you want to hear a little bit more about the books that I DNF'd in December, January, and February. So now getting into the books that I actually completed in February, the first book that I read was Remote Control by Nnedi Okorafor. This is a novella that is her newest release. It is Afrofuturism science fiction set in Ghana, and we are following our main character, Sankofa, who is a young girl who we're following her kind of at different points in her life, but I think the oldest she is in this book is maybe like 14. So there is one point where we're following her at like 13, 14 as she is traveling across Ghana on foot in search of this mysterious seed that she had as a child that was taken from her. But then we're also following her when she is maybe like 7 or something, when she first encounters this mysterious seed, and when she also first gets her powers, because she does have these powers where she's able to kill people pretty much like instantaneously. And so we follow her at a young age when she first gets those powers and how that's affecting her, and then kind of how she gets set off on this journey in search of this seed. And as she travels, her reputation precedes her, and people call her the adopted daughter of the Angel of Death because of her powers to kill people so easily. And so she's traveling alone except for a fox companion, which she doesn't really know why this fox travels with her, but it does. And so along the way, because her kind of reputation precedes her, people do help her, but mostly out of fear because of her powers. And so she does end up being very isolated from other people. And I ended up liking this book, but it was very different from what I was expecting it to be. Because from the description, I, for one thing, was expecting there to be some kind of death figure that took her in, whether it was actually like some kind of personification of death, or if it was just a person who sort of represented death in some way. But that is not the case. Really, calling her the adopted daughter of the Angel of Death is just a title that people call her because of her powers, and there isn't any like death figure in the book. And I guess because of that like assumption that I had about it, I also was expecting this to maybe have more of a magical feel to it, even though it is sci-fi, but some sci-fi has a kind of magical feel to it anyway, so I guess I was kind of expecting that, but I don't think it had that. It definitely felt very like real world, but with a little bit of like sci-fi to it. But there are a lot of things that I really liked about this book. One of which is that I think it has a really great sense of place. I could really imagine this place, and like as she was walking by foot across Ghana, as she encountered these kind of futuristic cities and the technology that was there, and it just, I think it did a really great job of building a sense of place so that I could really feel like I was there and imagine it. I think also Sankofa's character is really well written, especially for such a short book. I'm always very impressed with authors who can make characters feel very real in very short amounts of time, like in novellas. And with Sankofa, I think I had a really good sense of who she was as a character, and also could really feel, you could feel her isolation and feel her loneliness, but also her determination, and also feeling that like throughout the book, as I said, she's very young throughout this whole thing, but she has to make some very difficult decisions, and she has this power that like she's very powerful, but it's very destructive, and it's part of what makes her be so isolated from other people. And it just, I think her character was really well written, and I really liked that about this. I think my only real complaint about this book was that at the end I felt a little bit like not enough was explained, or like not that much had been like resolved from this book. But I kind of have mixed opinions about that feeling because for one thing, I don't think that that was necessarily the point of the book. I think what I was wanting out of the book was not necessarily what the author was trying to do. And so my frustration with like feeling like it wasn't resolved in a way that I found super satisfying might be more user error than error of the book. Because I feel like what it intended to do for this character and this like world, I think it did that. Yeah, so overall, I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was really well done. The next book that I finished was You Can't Touch My Hair by Phoebe Robinson. This is a nonfiction book. Phoebe Robinson is a comedian, and so in this she's talking about like Black culture, racism, and microaggressions, her experience being a comedian and being a Black woman, and just a lot of things about her own experience being a Black woman in America, but approaching it in a comedic way. And she narrates the book herself, which I really love. I love it when comedians narrate their own books because they're able to deliver jokes or just like the beats of the way the stories are meant to be told. They deliver it the way it's intended. So I really liked listening to the audiobook for this and hearing her narrate it. There were a couple points where I felt like it had maybe a few too many pop culture references for my taste, or a couple times where like there are certain types of jokes that she would tell that would get a little bit repetitive sometimes, but overall I really liked this book. The next book that I finished was The House on the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. I listened to this as an audiobook. It is a standalone, I think it's a standalone, adult fantasy that's following our main character Linus, who works kind of like as a social worker for the Department of Magical Youth, and at the beginning of the story he is sent to evaluate an orphanage and the man who takes care of the kids there. But while he is there, he becomes very attached to the kids at this orphanage, and he has a romance with Arthur, the man who like takes care of them and is in charge of the orphanage. And Linus learns more about the world and more about how to, I don't know, look outside his bubble and be a more compassionate person who thinks about the world in a more holistic way, I guess. And I think that I just didn't love this book as much as a lot of people do, because I have seen only like 5-star rave reviews for this, and it was very just okay for me. I didn't feel particularly connected to any of the characters. The kids were kind of cute and quirky, but I just like didn't get very invested in them. I didn't really care about the main character, Linus. I wasn't really invested in the romance between Arthur and Linus. There wasn't that much about it. Going into the book, I was definitely expecting there to be more about the romance, but they actually don't interact that much. There isn't that much about the romance, and from what we got of it, I just like didn't get it. Like, I don't understand why Arthur liked Linus. I thought Arthur was probably the most interesting character in the book, and I felt like that actually if the book had just been about like Arthur and the kids on this island and Linus hadn't even been like part of the story, I probably would have liked the book better. I also to some extent think that maybe I didn't love the kids because I was listening to the audiobook and I didn't really like some of the voices the narrator was doing for the kids, so that may have also kind of put me off from them a little bit, but I don't think that that's like the thing that would have made like the difference in how I felt about this book. I did really like though about how all of the children are so supportive of each other. Like, they're all so different, but they all really care about each other and they all really support each other. And I thought that was really cute and endearing of them. So I liked that about them. But I think overall I kind of had like the opposite reaction to this book that you're supposed to, because the book just made me kind of sad. And from what I've heard from other people, it's supposed to be really like comforting and hopeful, and I just felt really sad for everybody who lived in this world. I don't know if I can explain why I felt this way, but ultimately the book just made me feel very sad. And And then, yeah, I also think that something that I'm realizing is that I just generally don't really like fantasy books that are about like fantasy government bureaucracy, which is a thing that I've encountered in a few books, and it's just like not my favorite. So I think that this was not for me. I was kind of bored and sad while I was reading it, and I gave it 3 stars. It was okay. Then the next book that I finished was Kushils Dart by Jacqueline Carey, and this took up a large portion of my month because this book is 900 pages. And I buddy read this with Chris from Chris Bookish Cauldron and Anita from Anita Reads, and I'm very glad that I buddy read it because I don't know if I would have understood what was happening or would have really been able to push through if I hadn't had people to talk to about it. So this is adult alternate history fantasy, and it's set in this world in which like Christianity did not form in the way that it did in our world, and instead another religion kind of became the most prominent religion in this world, which kind of focuses on worshipping sex and sexuality. They have a goddess of sexuality, and they view sex work as a way of worshipping God. And so in this, our main character is a courtesan, and she is dedicated to this goddess of sexuality, but she has also been chosen by Kushil, who is another god, who's the goddess of punishment. And so she has what is called Kushils Dart, which causes her to experience pleasure and pain as like one thing. And so as a courtesan, she does like BDSM kind of stuff. But she also, in addition to being a courtesan, she's also been trained as a spy. And so she uses her like access to the nobility as a courtesan as a way of spying on them and then bringing back information to this man who kind of raised her, sort of this like mentor father figure who has kind of like mysterious political motives that we don't really know for most of the book. And this book does get very political. Like, going into this, I had always heard people talk about it as if this book is primarily just like erotica, like BDSM erotica. And I don't think that that's the case. Like, it does have a lot of like BDSM and sexual content in it, so like content warnings for that kind of thing. Be prepared for that. But I think the focus of the book is really on the politics of this world, and the politics do get kind of confusing. The author really like does not hold your hand in trying to explain these politics, and sometimes it's a little difficult to follow because we're reading from a first person perspective, and so like if she has not interacted with this specific person, like we have never interacted with them, so it's a little bit hard to follow who some of these people are. I did like the characters that were in this book, but I also felt very distant from them, and I think that has to do a lot with the writing or the way in which the story is being told and framed, because the main character is telling this story in retrospect, which the way it's being told just kind of automatically creates some distance between the reader and the actual events and characters. But I did like the characters themselves. I also really liked the writing in this book. I think it has a really lovely writing style that just flows really easily, and it doesn't feel dense, but it is very like beautifully written, and I just was really enjoying the writing style, and I think that also just made it much easier to fly through this very like chunky book. And the politics get very dense, but the writing itself was not dense, which I really liked. But it is a very slow-paced book, and by the end of it, I was getting a little bit like frustrated with the way the author kind of focused her story, because I wanted it to focus more on the characters and those more emotional character moments, and I felt like she kind of steered away from those. And also at the end, I was getting a little bit frustrated with the main character, Phaedra, because it seemed like towards the end, her solution to everything was like just to have sex with people. Like there was no obstacle that she couldn't overcome by having sex with somebody. And that was just kind of like ridiculous and frustrating. And through most of the book, I didn't feel that way. It was just towards the end where it started getting a little bit like, really? But yeah, overall, I had very mixed feelings about it and a lot of complaints, but I also really liked it and thought it was really well written. And I'm going to read the second book. I gave this one 4 stars. I'm gonna have a full review for this where I talk a lot more about it, because like I have a lot of thoughts and opinions about this book, and it's gonna be a real long one probably. So if you want to hear a long discussion about this book, keep an eye out for that video. The next book that I read was a little novella that was The Forest God by Jamie Lackey. This is set in a forest where we're following 3 main characters. One is the forest god, one is a young lord, and one is an apprentice witch. And in this forest, the god of the forest is continually reborn into the body of a different woodland creature, and in this instance he was reborn into the body of a hare. And at the beginning of the story, the lord injures the hare, and the apprentice witch kind of takes him in to heal him. And that is what brings these 3 characters together. And I don't want to explain much more about it because it's like 80 pages and it's very short, but I really enjoyed this. I liked the writing. I found it to be a very satisfying story for something that was so short. And I actually kind of wish there had been more to it, even though I was satisfied with the story as it was. After finishing it, I kind of wanted to keep reading about these characters and this world, and I definitely would read more from this author. Then I finally got to complete Conjuring Women by Fia Takara. This is historical fiction that I had started a while ago. I had started reading it physically and then decided to switch to audiobook, but I was waiting for my audiobook loan from the library to come in, which it finally did, and I'm really glad that I got to finish this. So this is historical fiction set in the South, both before and after the Civil War, and so we're following our main character Rue at 2 different points in her life. One before the Civil War, where she is living on a plantation with her mother as enslaved people, and her mother is a healer. And then we also follow Rue when she is an adult, after the Civil War, and still living on the same plantation, and she has now become the healer for the people who live there. But at that point in time, there is a sickness that is going around, and then there also is a child who was born with his eyes completely black, which some people take as a bad omen, and so people are getting very paranoid and starting to blame Rue for like anything bad that happens to them. And I thought that this book had some really interesting characters in it. I think that the main characters of Rue and her mother, Miss Maybelle, yes, Miss Maybelle, were both like really interesting people. Rue has to make some really difficult choices at different points, and they're not always the right choices, but she's trying to do what she thinks is best and trying to survive and protect the people that she cares about. Her mother is a really interesting character because she is this like wise healer woman who, from Rue's perspective, felt very unknowable. And so I just thought both of them were really interesting people, and their relationship was interesting, and I don't know, they just felt very real. And even the side characters in this, I think, felt very realistic. And yeah, overall, I thought the book was really well done. I don't know if I enjoyed it so much because it, you know, because of the time period and the subject matter of it, like, it was difficult to read in a lot of places, but I thought it was really well done, and I gave it 4 stars. And then the last book that I finished in February was The Treasure at the Heart of the Tanglewood by Meredith Ann Pierce. This is a standalone fantasy that I am not actually sure if it is adult or YA. I think it might be YA actually. But in this, we're following our main character Hannah, who lives in the forest. She doesn't remember how she got there. She doesn't remember what her life was like beforehand, but one day she just came into being in the forest. She has like flowers and plants that grow out of her hair, and she knows like remedies and how to heal people. And so the people from the local town come to her for remedies, even though they're very afraid of the forest. She also is able to like talk to some of the woodland creatures and has some friends. Specifically, she has a badger that she is friends with, which I love. But there's also a magpie and 3 baby foxes that she's friends with. And in her life, she has a certain routine that she follows and she hasn't really questioned before, but at the beginning of the book, some things happen that kind of break her usual routine, and she starts to question why her life is the way it is, how she ended up where she is, and why she can't remember her past, why she does some of the things that she does. And that leads her to find that her life is not what she thought it was, and there is something that actually has been trapping her in this forest. And so that sets her off to figuring out how to free herself. And I enjoyed this. This has a lot of tropes that I like. It has, you know, a healer who lives in the forest and people come to her for healing. She has animal companions that she can talk to. One of them's a badger. Like, there are a lot of things that I liked about this. It really feels like a fairy tale and actually kind of gave me like Persephone vibes, but I feel like a lot of modern Persephone type of stories focus on like kind of romanticizing the Hades Persephone dynamic, and that's not the route that this one takes. But yeah, she definitely gives me this like Persephone kind of vibe that I enjoyed. I think that I wasn't super invested in the story because it didn't, I don't know, I didn't like feel the stakes of it, I guess. And it does, as I said, it has this like very fairy tale feel to it. So I think that there was some feeling of distance that I had while I was reading this, but I really enjoyed it in the way that I enjoy a fairy tale. I did also feel though at the end there was somewhat of like an info dump where like she gets to a certain point and then there's like a large chunk at the end where someone is just telling her a story, explaining everything, which I was glad to know that information, and it was an interesting story, but also that's just like not my favorite way to, I don't know, get information, is just like a large info dump of someone being like, let me just tell you this story and explain everything you needed to know while you were on this like whole journey before this point. But yeah, overall I enjoyed it. I thought it was kind of interesting that like throughout the writing there were like some Old English words kind of like sprinkled in, which sometimes like kind of at the beginning disrupted my like flow in reading, but I got used to it and I enjoyed this. I think I gave this 3.5 stars. So that is all for my February wrap up. I think my favorite thing that I read this month was probably the Forest God novella. I just really enjoyed that one a lot, even though it was so short. I'd love to hear what was your favorite thing that you read in February. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!